We would like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land that we're coming from, which is the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people of the Melbourne region, from the Kulin Nation, and pay our respects to the elders, past, present and emerging, and of course to all other traditional owners represented here today. The program today, as you well know, is having a look at the new global biodiversity framework, the big decision which was made at COP15 last December, which for the first time fully recognised the critical role of local governments, or what they call sub-regional governments, in driving biodiversity action and tackling the biodiversity extinction crisis. But we're very aware that when you're a busy local government practitioner, grinding away locally in your planning and operations and delivery, it's often a little bit difficult to work out, well, sounds good, but how on earth do I action it at my level? So that's really the whole focus of today's session, bringing the global framework down to local action. It's just exactly what ICLEI helps cities around the world to do with climate action as well. And of course, the climate framework and the biodiversity framework are very closely related. So the program today, we're deliberately starting with the local government practitioner's perspective. And so Chris will be kicking off and particularly talking about what does it look like from here? What are we already doing in Adelaide? What would we like to know? What support would we need, etc. Then we're going to ask Councillor Amanda Stone to talk about what it looks like from an elected member's perspective. And then Amy will come in and give us the research perspective. So we're going from practitioner to elected member to research. And then the final speaker will be Helene, who will be giving you an update on the Cities with Nature Academy Australia initiative, which we kicked off last year. And we'll say a little bit more about that when we get to that point. So I think that's all we needed to say. We're recording the session. Please use the chat function. The way we'll run the speakers one after another without questions, and then we'll have quite an extensive time at the end for questions. We normally run the webinars till well after the hour. It might be 2:15. If people want to keep talking, please do, and we'll just facilitate that. So I think we're ready to roll. And so I'd like to first introduce Chris Butcher. And if I've got this right, Chris, you are the Senior Sustainability Advisor for the City of Adelaide. And
yeah, for biodiversity, yes. Yep.
What it looks like from your perspective. So over to you, thanks.
Okay. Yeah, thanks, Steve. Thanks for the introduction. Also want to acknowledge that City of Adelaide, and actually where I'm also sitting now, working from home, is located on the traditional country of the Kaurna people of the Adelaide Plains, and we pay respect to the elders past and present. We recognise and respect their cultural heritage, beliefs and relationship with the land. And we also extend that respect to visitors of other Aboriginal language groups and other First Nations. I'm going to jump straight into it and talk about some of City of Adelaide's strength, or some of our strengths. So for those who aren't very familiar, Adelaide is very, it's quite unique, it's quite fortunate, and we have an extensive network of parklands surrounding the city. So there's the city CBD and North Adelaide. It was about 700 hectares of usable green and blue space, and we still have remnant vegetation from 4 distinct ecological communities remaining within these parklands. So we're very lucky. That also gives us excellent habitat and connectivity. So connectivity around the park, around the city, with 29 parks. Through the city, we've got 6 squares which sort of perforate the grey space of the city. And across the landscape, we have the city was built around the River Torrens, which also has an amazing linear park that runs the entire metropolitan length of it, that goes through the city, and there are several other waterways. To put that in a visual perspective, this is our little council. It's roughly shaped like a baby grand piano if you look at it from the south, which is sort of from this way. And this is it. There's a CBD here, and here's North Adelaide here. And for the sports fans, right in the middle, that's Adelaide Oval. Those are the 6 parks that we have. There's 5 and a bit of a cross pattern in the CBD, and one in North Adelaide. Our river flows through the middle there, which has a vegetated riparian area of the whole length. And we have other little waterways that sort of trickle through the parklands, a bit more than trickling lately with the rain we've been having. There's a view from of the southern parklands looking east. And this just gives you an idea of the significance of this green space and the buffer that it provides. It helps with the urban heat island effect and creates great connectivity. On the left, you can see these two little squares, the city squares, and they provide an excellent resource and refuge for people and animals alike. The same parkland, the same southern parklands, but from a different perspective. You can again see the significance of it. That big brown construction site at the bottom is actually a new wetlands that was initially designed primarily as a flood mitigation device, but it's also designed to have to act as a functioning wetland, which is great for the birds, the bugs, the fish, and all sorts of critters, including humans who love the space as well. And here's a photo of it just soon after it was opened, and it's really literally grown into itself, and it's this beautiful oasis in the south of the city now. Another strength we have, we've got the capacity, the capability, and support to do excellent work in biodiversity. We have a great group of parklands are cared for and supported by dedicated volunteers, community groups, environmental NGOs, and specialists. Often they give their time for free, but we've got lots of support from the community. We internally have a team of 6 full-time biodiversity staff who are trained in conservation land management. They're out there every day on the ground, in hand weeding, planting, just doing the hard work to benefit the biodiversity on the ground. And there are 2 office-based policy roles, myself is one of them, and my colleague, who are trying to do the hard work from the policy strategy perspective, getting the projects out and approved. Lastly, the protection of our biodiversity is written into some high-level policy documents, into our strategic plans, parklands management strategies, and it has the support of elected members and other governing bodies. So that really helps when we have another competing interest. We can hold up this document and say, hang on, no, council said that this area is allocated for biodiversity as a priority, for example. Here's just some photos. Here's some of our biodiversity team doing some hands and knees, looks like hand weeding, judging by their bags, in one of our biodiversity sites in the Western Parklands. And some recent work they did with Rotary to plant out a high river bank along the Torrens, which used to be just exotic grasses that were kind of neglected, but now they're planted out with beautiful river red gum ecological river red gum plants. So it's a real improvement there. So some of the challenges that we manage as a council and as sort of stewards for the biodiversity is that, just like a lot of other councils, in fact, anyone who pretty much works in this space, there's a lot of competition and competing interests in the land most of the time. Sometimes it actually can complement it, but often it can be quite, us or them mentality. The parklands were set aside way back in 1830 something for the people as public space for them to use and enjoy and recreate. That includes these things like sport. We've got a lot of sporting fields. A lot of them are dedicated sporting fields. Other are just open space that can be used for sport like disc golf or BMX or cyclocross. We also have major events like Worm Adelaide, Adelaide 500, fringe festivals, also weddings and work functions as well. The parklands are a very popular event space. It's obviously very culturally important to the Kaurna people and remains important as caring for country and their sort of cultural home. But we also have a cemetery. olive groves that are still harvested, Japanese garden. We've had schools and universities, businesses, paths and roads to get to all of these things, and they take up space. And people are using this space increasingly as their backyard. As population densities increase, parklands are their backyard. They go there to meditate, to exercise, for picnics, bird watching, and all these sorts of things. And some of these things are complementary to what we're talking about. And lastly, but definitely not least, it's one of the most important in my perspective uses is biodiversity as a sort of conservation education piece that we can use to celebrate for the parklands. Again, in a visual perspective, these blue sites are our sporting ones. So there's, you can see hard stand oval, hard stand netball courts, sporting fields, ovals, different levels of, could be Saturday soccer for the kids or Adelaide Oval, different scales, different audiences. This is some of the cultural applications. Ghana is just a general central point. This is their land. Event space. And lastly, biodiversity. So these are sites that are recognized for their biodiversity values, either remnant biodiversity or carefully chosen revegetation, native revegetation sites. This is just an example. If we went around the parklands, there'd be many more call-out boxes. And again, this is what I want to mean with the increasing demand on the parklands as their backyard, not just for people in the city, but people in the surrounding suburbs. They will increase their reliance on the parklands for their sort of recreational space. So another challenge that we have is that the state government and the public perception of the value of some of our biodiversity. So as you all know, biodiversity sites, especially in southern parts of the country, they can appear messy and brown and dry in the summer. So what to me looks like a relatively healthy grassland, albeit a bit too thatchy, other people look at it and go, that is a neglected, dry paddock that's full of weeds and needs to be improved. I want, ovals and trees and irrigation, not stuff that my dog can get grass seeds in their ears and I have to take them to the vet when they walk through there. So these are challenges that then make other people perceive it as free space that is up for grabs. And now I'll go to a recent, very real example that scared the heck out of me, to be honest. It was the example of the South Australian Mounted Police Barracks and their plight for finding a new home. So for those who weren't aware of this at all, the police have a barracks in the Western Parklands, and they have a brigade of police greys, these beautiful big grey horses that patrol the streets. The new Women's and Children's Hospital is slated to go exactly where their current barracks is, and they've been forced to move. But as a consolation, they were told that they could go anywhere in the parklands. And so they chose this quote unquote neglected site in the southern parklands. But it just so happens that this site is probably our most biodiverse example of remnant vegetation that we have. And it was the photos that I put in the first three examples of the dry, scrappy looking places. It's this park. So, but we knew that we had something good here, and we knew this because we had asked respected experts to do floral surveys with locating them on a map. We made this area a key biodiversity and got that recognized by council in our policy documents, and we wrote management plans for this area. So no one can come back and say that it's neglected or it's this empty space that no one's doing anything with, because we could show them this. So we started to have that conversation, like, what can we do? How can we enter this conversation to offer alternatives? So we started the conversation. We got strong support from members of the community. Our Lord Mayor was very vocal, along with the councils and elected members, in their opposition to this move. The neighbouring city of Unley, the council there, they wrote a letter to support our cause. Environmental NGOs and specialists and associations, I reached out to them, and they were already moving on what they could do to stop this from happening. And the support for the park grew. These rallies were organised by these groups. There's the Adelaide Parklands Association, very active, very passionate about the parklands and what they should be used for, which is pretty much in line with what I think they should be used for. We had Ghana elders out on the right. Here there's Uncle Jeffrey Newchurch. He's a respected Ghana elder. He spoke in defence of the park, and the media were there, and the media spread the message. And so the message was getting out. People were writing to their members, to anyone who they think could make an impact on this. And then the Premier decided on an alternative. So that subheading there, giving in to public pressure, the state government has scrapped plans to build a new home in choosing a different site. So not only did we protect this site, we protected the parklands in general from the horses being essentially impacting another site. So this was
sorry, Prince, just a couple more minutes if you don't mind.
Sorry, a couple more minutes.
Is that okay?
Yeah, sure. So this was a great win. It also scared the heck out of us of what could have happened. I'll touch on very briefly. So the benefits. Another challenge, we want to look into the benefits of being in high biodiversity sites. So they're well known, but they're not widely known. We understand the benefits of being in high biodiversity, but we're not that many people know about it. So we want to get that word out. All right, so what does the network mean for my work? It puts the biodiversity talk in a language that the policymakers and councillors can relate to, can understand, can utilize in their decision-making frameworks. And it gives them confidence that we are working with confidence in what we are doing, basically. So what we have behind us is the best minds in biodiversity have decided and agreed upon this framework, and that gives them confidence that they can support what we're doing, I hope. And if we had this sort of in place, perhaps we could have prevented the barracks ever being an issue in the first place. So the battles for biodiversity are improving, but they're often really hard fought. And the principles of this framework align with our own. When I read the framework, I was relieved to know that, yes, we are heading in the right direction, and what we are doing is in line with what is globally agreed as the right direction, give or take to local scenarios, but yes. And this gives us extra confidence that we have the support of this framework behind us. I can use the framework to support ideas in various stages prior to approval. So if I'm walking through the parklands, I'll have an idea, and I'll put the seed and I'll put it in some soil, and hopefully it'll germinate. But if I have this framework behind me, I can maybe use that framework to go, hey, yes, this is something we should develop. And I can also use the framework to form strategies and support new policies, which will open the door for even more. So it gives that confidence. And the alignment also strengthens our case when we need to move quickly to push against something or towards something which we think is better for environmental issues, because it either aligns with the framework or it does not align with the framework. So what do I need to know in order to be able to implement this? I think the important idea is we need to discuss it more and communicate it within our networks. I mean, I am one person, but I'm in a network which taps into a massive wealth of knowledge and influence far greater than my own. Concurrently, have these discussions internally. I'll speak with the people, our leaders and representatives, and raise their awareness to this movement that has this global agreement behind it, to get the message across that, yes, this biodiversity thing it's important, and what we're doing for it is important. And there are tools, targets, goals, objectives, all these words available in place, and the world is watching us and looking to us to see what we are doing and maybe how they can do it to their patch as well. So I'll leave it there with a recent photo of our beautiful river in flood, and I'll look forward to any questions that you have at the end. And I'll try and stop screen.
Thank you, Chris. Is that the River Torrens, or is that Brownhill Creek, or what are we looking at?
That's the Torrens, yes.
Wow.
Yeah, that's the Torrens, right? That's just, if you're familiar with Adelaide, it's just in the downstream section in Bonython Park, Talia Wadley, just near where the brewery used to be. Right.
As a former resident of Adelaide, congratulations on all the work you're doing. Terrific presentation, solid gold, and it really set up this webinar well. And interesting, towards the end, you started to talk about how this informs council decision making, etc. So it's a very good point to hand over to Amanda, who is probably well known to most of us. Councillor Amanda Stone from the City of Yarra, very long-standing elected member, several times mayor. She's chair of the ICLEI Regional Advisory Committee, special advisor to the ICLEI Global Executive Committee on Nature, and attended the Biodiversity COP last December. So Amanda's now going to talk more from the elected member's point of view. Thanks, Amanda.
Thank you, Steve. What a wonderful introduction from the City of Adelaide. They are walking the talk on the new framework, and they've done lots of work over many years to make sure that they can actually respond. So well done, Adelaide. I don't know how many of our guests today were actually at COP15 in Montreal in December, but if you were, you'll probably agree with me that it was a fairly almost electric environment. It came at such a critical time. This was the 15th Conference of the Parties to the UN Convention of Biological Diversity, and it was a watershed moment. It was agreeing on this next 10-year plan in the context of the last 10-year plan. When it was audited, it was found that basically none of its targets were met. So the stakes were very, very high. We all know we're in a biodiversity crisis, unprecedented extinction rates, ecosystems collapsing, unchecked production and consumption patterns. There's a lot at stake. And on top of that, last year, the World Economic Forum's Global Risks Report identified biodiversity loss as the third highest, most severe risk on the global scale over the next 10 years, which of course led to the UN Secretary General saying that making peace with nature needs to be the defining task of the 21st century. So that really backs up a lot of what Christopher was saying about biodiversity is important. Those who know it. We need to get it out further, but the world is watching us, and it's not just us. It's going to be watching all the signatories to this convention and those who agree to this new agreement in Montreal. It's really important. This convention is the only UN convention that's consistently acknowledged an explicit role for local government in achieving the goals that nations sign up to and agree to. Fortunately, ICLEI has been at the table of the discussions over the last 2 years leading up to this COP15 and the final agreement. The role of local governments was not only retained as it has been in previous agreements, but it was enhanced, and it's got a starring role. Christopher was sort of talking about it in general terms, but I'm just going to walk you through very briefly where it fits in and what it might need for you. Being present at this COP with so many local government representatives who were committed to nature and biodiversity in their municipalities really can only inspire, provide optimism, courage and determination. So what did they agree to? Well, they made a number of important decisions, and what's on the screen in front of you is a package of them. They're a package of 5 that all work together. And the most important one here is Decision 15, which relates to engaging subnational, state and local governments in plans and actions to meet the parties, the nation's commitments. One of these was the Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, which Chris has just been talking about. And it's intended to enable participation at all levels of government, a whole of government approach. And that is really important for us to keep in mind. The other parts of this package relate to monitoring, planning, reporting and reviewing, mobilising resources, capacity building, and of course, specifically engagement with governments, cities, and other local authorities. So that's the framework. This is the big decision that applies to us. Within this decision, there were a number of action-oriented targets, and many of those were relevant to local government. You've probably heard of some of these targets already, the 30 by 30 targets, which aim to ensure that by 2030, at least 30% of, this is for nations, of areas of degraded terrestrial water, coastal marine ecosystems are under restoration. And our national government has committed to that quite quickly around the time of the COP last year. The two targets that are relevant to us in local government are Target 12 and Target 14. And these are the two that if anyone's going to focus on this framework, this is where we should hone in, and it's obviously where Adelaide has been focusing too. Oh, sorry, I cannot read it on the screen. My Zoom presentation skills are somewhat lacking, so I'm just going to actually, Steve, can you read out Target 12? Can you see it on the screen, or is it hidden by pictures for you too?
I can, yep.
Could you read that out, please?
Yep, Target 12 urges for increasing the area, quality and connectivity and improving access to and benefits from green and blue spaces in urban areas. This can be achieved by mainstreaming the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity at all decision-making and urban planning.
Thank you. So that's exactly what Adelaide is doing. They focus very much on blue and green spaces, and they are mainstreaming their conservation and sustainable use into everything. Adelaide talked about it being part of their policies and strategies and plans, all their high-level documents, but they've also backed it up with people infrastructure, haven't they? That wonderful team of paid employees and volunteers and other networks who are backing it up. And Target 14 was the other one specifically written for local government. Steve, if you wouldn't mind.
Target 14 aims to ensure that biodiversity issues are integrated into policies, regulations, planning and different strategies within and across all levels of government to make cities and regions more livable places.
Exactly. So that's also what Adelaide's doing. But I think it's something that all local governments could start to do when they're revising or reviewing all their biodiversity strategies, plans and actions to try and integrate them all, but also to line them up with this framework. And there's a good reason for doing that. This is the actual decision, Decision 15, and the framework was adopted as a package with 5 other decisions. And under Decision 15-6 on mechanisms for planning, monitoring, reporting and review, the parties are requested to submit revised or update national biodiversity strategies and action plans by COP16, which is at the end of next year. And these need to be aligned with the new Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. Now, you probably all know, because you're into this, that Australia did adopt a national biodiversity strategy and action plan in November 2021, and it has a 10-year outline, but it will need to be revised based on this new framework, and it's expected that local governments will be engaged in revising that national strategy. Finally, Decision 15 on your screens has a comprehensive plan of action. It's quite clear, which details how national governments are expected to work with subnational and local governments to implement the framework. And I'll put a link to this document in the chat. It's not long and it's very easy to read, and it's really, really clear what the agreement expects to happen. So what does all this mean for local government? Like Adelaide, most of us have biodiversity strategies or plans or policies or nature strategies, or even just an environment strategy that involves biodiversity. We're all taking care of land and ecosystems and blue and green spaces and focused on nature-based solutions. Despite everything that's spelled out in this agreement about multi-level action and national governments engaging with local governments to implement this and to report on it, it's quite unlikely that the first step is going to be taken by national governments. And obviously local governments are going to have to take the lead and take initiative, as so many are, and align their own work plans where possible with this new global biodiversity framework, prioritising those two targets, target 12 on blue and green spaces and target 14 on integrating biodiversity into the business of council. Increasing, and of course there are benefits to this anyway, increasing the area and quality of blue-green spaces in our municipalities benefits both people and nature, and mainstreaming biodiversity into policies and planning not only ensures that biodiversity is enhanced, but it also increases livability for our communities. Right now, there is a groundswell of support for nature and biodiversity. It's been building. There's a growing awareness of its connection to the climate crisis. COVID obviously brought this into stark relief, but it also led to a greater connection between communities and nature. And now is the time, really, to step out our efforts. If we're going to achieve this global goal of living in harmony with nature by 2050. That goal is built into the convention. So advocacy to our national government will be needed to ensure that the spirit of this new global agreement and whole of government cooperation is achieved. That advocacy will be undertaken by ICLEI in conjunction with like-minded organisations. There's a new Biodiversity Council that's been established. That is one of those organisations we can work with. That advocacy can also be undertaken through peak bodies, local government bodies, and there was a motion at the ALGA National General Assembly this year on exactly this topic. There are many ways to advocate. But we know that local governments will also need support to deliver on this framework through partnerships and capacity building. And ICLEI can support local councils in that way, specifically through the Cities with Nature platform. I'll put a link to that also in the chat. This is an online platform. It's free to join it, where local governments can share their nature and biodiversity goals and achievements. They can network with other councils doing similar things, access resources and plans and guides. Most importantly, they can actually contribute their achievements to meeting some of these goals and targets. This is a global platform, Cities with Nature, which can feed into the reporting of our national achievements. The Cities with Nature platform has been designed to align to the global biodiversity framework. So it's the platform for local governments to report against if they're going to feed in through our national government to achieving some of the targets in the new framework. These are some of the suggestions for local governments from the ICLEI Cities Biodiversity Centre. They're very wordy, they're very high level, but they do reflect what's been spoken about. Aligning priorities and actions on biodiversity with the National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan. I'll put a link to that in the chat as well. Prioritising projects that contribute to the global biodiversity targets 12 and 14 are the stars in that list, and mainstreaming biodiversity considerations into all your high-level plans and strategies and infrastructure delivery. Obviously, collaborating with national governments, it takes two to tango, and we're going to need our national government to come to the party on that. At some stage, this decision 15 will have to be grappled with. National governments will have to engage with local government. What that looks like yet is a little bit unclear, but as a sector, we can take the lead. We already are, and start to do some of the things on this particular slide here, and start connecting with each other so that we're actually in sync with each other in keeping an eye on the national biodiversity strategy and action plan, keeping an eye on the global framework, trying to align what we do with those where we can, and trying to report on the Cities with Nature platform, because if we can do that, we'll produce a huge groundswell of action towards this new global biodiversity framework. And goodness knows, we might even meet some of those targets by 2030. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amanda. Well done. And we will have a little bit more on the Cities with Nature at the very end of the program. Need to move on, and now we're going to be looking at some research that's being done through the University of Melbourne around, as I understand it, around the monitoring, measuring and reporting frameworks which are already available. So my pleasure to hand over to Dr. Amy Haas, who is Senior Lecturer in Urban Horticulture at the University of Melbourne. And Amy has brought along with her one of her PhD students who's working on this. So looking forward to meeting him as well. Thanks, Amy.
Thanks, Steve. Yeah, thanks for the invitation to join you. I'm Amy, and I'm presenting today from the lands of the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people, and on the border of the lands of the Bunurong people, which are the lands where this research has taken place. Yeah, so I want to just share three different projects that are related to this topic. But before we do, just really quick background. My research area of interest is urban biodiversity and the impacts of cities on biodiversity, how we can use that knowledge to kind of shape how we create, manage, design cities. But I also use a comparative ecology framework. So that's recognizing that the responses we see in biodiversity are also influenced by the context of the city. So the cultural background, the climate, the history of development, levels of income, all sorts of factors do play a role in moderating the type of response we see in biodiversity. And so I'm really interested within that, how do patterns that appear at the local scale, which are very much driven by context and very heterogeneous, which of those actually kind of emerge to become general principles at, for example, a global scale, where there's a lot more consistency and kind of a much clearer picture. And a nice, well, an analogy I find helpful is thinking about the end of a rope. And at the top of the rope, it's very clearly a rope, it's very clearly a thing. But as it starts to unravel, you see a lot more of the individual threads that make up that rope. And so that's where there's a lot of kind of richness and local influences. So if we think about it in terms of the topic today and the global frameworks, at the global scale, we have these really clear frameworks that are so valuable for the reasons Chris and Amanda have outlined. And I would include the Cities Biodiversity Index in that as well as a useful framework. And then we scale down through national, subnational, and down to the local scale, where individual municipalities have their own challenges, their own priorities, their own needs in terms of how they interpret and how they relate to these other frameworks. And my interest is, how do we find the pathways that kind of connect that richness and variability at the local scale with the really helpful frameworks at the global scale. So as I said, I've wanted to talk about 3 different projects. The first, though, is research being done by Everest Rutabuka. And rather than me tell you about his research, I'd like to just invite him to say a couple sentences to explain his work.
Amy, thanks for the introduction, the topic. As you have highlighted, my research is addressing 2 major barriers that hamper this reporting linkage. One of them is that many biodiversity indicators in this pollen arena were developed or designed mostly in large scale, such as national or global scale. This actually leads to scalability barriers or scalability limitation when it comes to local reporting or to local monitoring. The second component of my barriers that I'm addressing is that those indicators were also designed or developed in non-urban ecosystems. This has more implication when it comes to transferability of indicator from non-urban ecosystem to urban ecosystem. So to address this, I'm examining the policy landscape by identifying the challenge and the opportunities for cities to address this reporting gap. So specifically, let me talk a little bit about opportunity. I'm trying to see which indicators city has been applying over time in different regions to see how feasible they are, how simplicity they are. Then that can be one of the opportunity to know what city need and what is feasible at the city context. The second component in terms of addressing identifying entry pathway for cities to report to the national and to global biodiversity framework through the lens of existing indicators from different scale. That is what you see on the screen. So I have different framework and I'm linking them using their indicators, the indicators that I'm proposing. So that will have more impact. So the ultimate goal for my PhD research is to develop a framework for selecting urban biodiversity indicators, and I will also test it in different cities. I'm hopeful that some of the research findings be published by the end of this year. So I'm looking forward to keep hearing this conversation from this webinar. Thanks.
Excellent. So the second project I want to talk to is one that was commissioned by the City of Melbourne back in 2020. And I would like to acknowledge Judy Bush, Jin Long Liu and Everest for their contributions to the project as well. So the City of Melbourne was really interested in understanding how they could connect with this global discussion. The Edinburgh process was underway, and but in terms of locally, what would that look like for City of Melbourne? And I'd like to acknowledge Lee Harrison is in the audience too. So thanks, Lee, for the opportunity to work on this. So there were 2 stages. The first stage was really a review of biodiversity and ecosystem targets and indicators to get an understanding of, what is the current state of play. And then secondly, looking at identifying and evaluating a small subset of indicators and potential targets for the City of Melbourne. So part of that first stage, we undertook a terms analysis of indicators in frameworks from global through to local or subnational. That was led by Everest, and that was the image in the previous slide. But we also looked at the Aichi targets. At this stage, the post-2020 framework material hadn't really been released. But within Aichi, there were several biodiversity targets that were very directly relevant to cities. And we looked at mapping them to sustainable development goals, targets, indicators. the city's biodiversity index indicators, and also thinking about City of Melbourne and the context, the next level of government being State of Victoria, and how was the State of Victoria looking at reporting on relevant or related biodiversity, so that we could start to develop an understanding of a potential pathway where monitoring and reporting on an indicator at the local scale could clearly connect to frameworks at other scales. Also within stage 1, we were interested in the targets, and this was based on some work that Charlie Nyland and others had published in 2017. So we did a review of biodiversity and related strategies for 37 municipalities in Australia, and looking at what are the targets that they're setting or articulating. We identified they fell into 3 general themes. So the first was council activities, the second related to community related activities, and the third were the actual state of the natural environment. And when we're looking at them, actually measuring those state of natural environments, it's the most direct measure of the impact on the environment itself, but also tended to have, you know, a much higher requirement in terms of resources and commitment. But within the strategies we looked, and most of the strategies that had stated targets included one that was a direct state of nature based target. And if we look more closely within that, there were kind of 5 themes. So one was a target around biodiversity, a second around conservation status, habitat quality and condition, fragmentation and connectivity, or land use and land cover change. And you can see that within the strategies, there's a real diversity of goals and targets being set, and it's reflecting that local context and the importance of that. So then we moved on to the second stage, where we had this rich material and then trying to translate it to the scale of what's most relevant for City of Melbourne and their goals and purposes. So we developed a program logic framework to represent a model of the system, and this is to tie in with their biodiversity monitoring and evaluation framework that was a pre-existing work. And within that, we identified 7 elements that were of interest to monitor and report on. 4 of them related to natural areas, as defined by indicator 9 in the city's biodiversity index. And then there were another 3 that relied on biodiversity data sets. And so then for each of those indicators, we calculated a 2020 baseline and did a really simple analysis of how could you actually use that indicator to inform some potential targets for the next strategy in the future. And while we were calculating that, we were also interested in looking at what's the relevance of the information that it's producing for City of Melbourne operations and management, as well as reporting and connecting to other frameworks. What were the challenges in scalability, and what were any limitations we encountered? So just as an example, one of the metrics was increased protection for natural areas. And so basically, it took a little time to map the natural areas, but once we had that, we were able to overlay, intersect planning overlays that afforded protection, such as a heritage overlay or a flood zone, and also overlays that identified potential risks. So if an area was flagged as a development zone, for example. And we also acknowledge that friends groups afford some level of informal protection, largely because of the role they can play, such as in the police paddocks example Chris shared. So from this analysis, we could identify that 8% of the natural areas had some level of protection. 36% though were would be considered at risk. Using this information, we can suggest, potential targets. So, for example, aligning with the target of 17% natural areas protected. You could develop, a similar target for City of Melbourne. In evaluating this research, it's possible to provide information at multiple scales. You could use it at the level of the site, precinct, municipality, but also amalgamated up to state, federal, global. It links to global frameworks, clearly through the Biodiversity Target 11 in the Aichi framework, but several other indicators as well. And one of the benefits is that by identifying those areas at potential risk, you're on the front foot and you can start to look at them and think, well, how can we actually, start to enact some protection measures so we don't get caught in the future. So we evaluated 8 different indicators. You can look at it at the fine scale of the individual, the specific information, but you can also amalgamate it up to look at precincts and then start to look at how do you allocate investment or prioritize actions in different precincts depending on what condition they have. The third project I wanted to just quickly mention is I mentioned biodiversity data sets were one set of information, and urban bioblitzes are becoming much more common way of generating biodiversity records for urban systems. And I've been working with Lewis and Esty evaluating BioBlitz biodiversity knowledge increases for several BioBlitzes. And I wanted to flag that for the City Nature Challenge in 2021, we've actually worked with the local council officers to develop a publication. And I saw Anna, one of the co-authors, was in the audience, where it's actually starting to develop a framework where there's existing records of known biodiversity. Some hasn't been recorded for 30 years, so it might not still be there. Some's been recorded more recently, but then we can look at what's the contribution of the records collected during the BioBlitz, what kind of, and what's the new knowledge we have after that. Yeah, lots to talk about there. But basically key messages, and these are largely from the City of Melbourne report and research. So indicators have the advantage of providing essential information that allow you to track your outcomes and plan ahead. They can allow you to link more directly to larger frameworks, so more visible reporting and, and initiatives, links to initiatives. The indicators we look for City of Melbourne were 2 basic data sets. So if you're identifying the right data sets to develop, you can actually pull out a lot of really useful information from them and calculate them relatively quickly. We also had some messages for researchers in that policy and decision relevant indicators are really something that we as researchers should be looking at more closely. It's really important to develop a better understanding of the policy contributions that we can make, just to make sure our science is actually addressing those knowledge gaps that achieve on-ground impacts. And also, if we want our data to inform decisions, we have to think about where is it being stored and provided, because often research data doesn't make it into the Atlas of Living Australia, for example. So that becomes a real challenge when councils are trying to generate an understanding of biodiversity and they know that there's more information out there than what they have access to. So thank you.
Wow, thank you, Amy. And look, sorry about Everest's sound challenges back then. I think other than all of the messages you've got there, the other key message I have is that for councils to work with their local universities and research institutes, they're great partnerships, and we see many of our members are doing exactly that. So thanks for that. There was just one question in the chat I thought we should clarify immediately, and that was, do all of these actions and targets only relate to public lands or to private land as well, which is not directly under the jurisdiction of local governments. All the experts online today, I think we all say it applies to all land, not just publicly owned land. Yep. Is that right? Yeah, of course. We've done quite a lot of work in our previous webinars on trying to influence private property owners to increase their greening as a part of this. So thank you very much for the three speakers on the biodiversity framework. We're just about up to the hour, but I want to give just 5 or 10 minutes to our friend Helene Stanley, because we have mentioned several times today the Cities with Nature program, which is ICLEI's global program to support urban biodiversity. And Helene is working with ICLEI to develop our new academy, which is an initiative to provide a very deep level of value to our members. So just a bit of an update from Helene to finish off the program, and I'm actually going to physically move the screen.
Great. Thanks very much for all those amazing presentations. That's been fantastic and really, really informative. So I too am presenting here from Wurundjeri country, and yeah, thank you. Introducing the Cities with Nature Academy. So we've been talking about the Cities with Nature program more generally, but I'm going to be talking about the new Cities with Nature Academy, which is in an Australian context. Yeah, this picture here is just, I like it, it reminds me of cities being on country, and this artwork is a portion of an artwork by Vicky Cousins, Lee Darrick, and Trina Ham, which is down by the Birrarung. And talking about Lee Harrison and City of Melbourne's good work, they're just in the background there's some animal-friendly lighting, which is a great program they've had. So talking about the context, I'll just run very quickly through. I've got 9 slides, but only less than 5 minutes, and I'm hoping to get some feedback and utilise the amazing skill set of people here to suggest some examples of some program materials which we're hoping to create. So I'm just going to run through these really quickly. The Cities with Nature Academy sits within the context of ICLEI, sits within the regional office, and sits within the Cities with Nature program more broadly, and reports into, as an optional extra, into the action platform. And the program that we've developed, so how this is differentiated is with some of the other programs that are happening with the Biodiversity Council and with Cities with Nature global program, is this is a very tailored program for local governments, where we're looking to, we've identified through research, so we've done some work with various organisations, and part of my background as well as the knowledge broker from the Clean Air and Urban Landscapes Hub, where I took over from Kathy Oak's great work at the start of that program. So we've fed that information in to try and create something specifically for local governments. And people wanted top-down help, collaborating across, and their communities were already reporting on what they were doing. And so we're going to be developing up briefing notes for councillors and executive program people, and feeding those in ideally at the induction part, or the induction timing, as part of that process. So we're making very tailored materials and then strategically introducing them to people at the right time. So that's one of the benefits of this program. And so the program is a pilot. We're running it for 12 months, and we have 10 or 9 that we can announce, cities that have come on board. And so these are the cities. So we're very, at the last webinar, we launched officially that the pilot program was all go. And so at this event today, we can proudly announce the City of Adelaide, the City of Hobart, the City of Monash, City of Mundaring, and correct me if I'm pronouncing anything, Mundaring, City of Newcastle, City of Stonington, City of Unley, City of Whittlesea, and the City of Yarra are all on this exciting journey with us to co-create this program. And So we've very intentionally, and this was by invite, and then we sort of snowballed out to create this team of amazing individuals and cities. And one of the things that we wanted to do was create this diversified mix right across Australia. So we wanted north, south, east, west. We needed to have rivers, coasts. We wanted a Ramsar site, and we wanted CBD, peri-urban, biodiversity hotspot, and we had we had all of these this in our wish list. And we even have 2 councils where the Birrarung Council, which is a leading model, runs through 2 of the municipalities that are part of our program. So there's going to be some great learning that we can share across. And so thank you to all of the founding councils. And I see some of the people are here today. And yeah, thanks very much to Christopher from City of Adelaide for presenting today as well. And so this is our Academy logo. Again, we've intentionally added Australia at the base. So there's potential for this program to roll out into other countries in the future. And this is a screenshot of our website that we're working up, which is going to be a knowledge base and where we're going to put some of these materials that we're going to be co-creating. But yeah, one of the important things is, and I know from my time at the Clean Air and Urban Landscapes Hub, is this this new whole lexicon has been developing with Indigenous perspectives, and just a whole really exciting way to be looking at urban nature, future urban nature. And so this is something that we want to build upon. And it's just such an exciting but also critical time. We have trees that have been Indigenous to places that won't be growing in the future due to climate change. And some of the great work from Dr. Dave Kendall on that. And then we have animals that are making passage from country in one area of Australia into different Aboriginal people's country. So there's just so much happening, and there's so much knowledge that can be shared with scientists, Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people across Australia, and Aboriginal scientists also, or in particular, I should say. Okay, so if anyone, this is my request to you, if anyone that is attending the event today, and fantastic, Amy, I see that you've already noted the incredible citizen science project that's going on, and yeah, I second that. Any citizen science where we know, such as iNaturalist, where we know that data is going straight to the ALA, are the sorts of good practice citizen science that we would like to be promoting. So if anyone knows good examples of fantastic nature strategic plans, briefing notes, but we're looking at sort of, modern versions that are, that layer information. So not your typical sort of, lengthy briefing notes, because we want to create something like that, but any sorts of good examples. And citizen science, so some of these how-to type resources. So they're just a few things. If anyone thinks of any that they know of that they want to share, please put them in the chat, or feel free to email them to us afterwards. Would be fantastic. And I don't want to take up too much more of your time, so we want to leave space for for comments and discussion. So thank you very much for your time, and thanks again for a great event.
Thank you, Helene, and thank you everyone for staying with us for that terrific program. So look, we've got time now for a general chat. A lot of the messages in the chat have been more about exchanging information, so there are a lot of very good links in there. So just working through the chats, we've answered that one.
Steve, can we just have a dwell on the rights of nature concept briefly?
Yes, please.
Sharon had a really good example answer to that, but I think it might be worth just seeing if she can elaborate, or if the questioner wants to elaborate. I think it was Deborah.
It was Councillor Deborah Maher who asked the question. I'm not sure who answered it.
Yes. It was Sharon who answered it. Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. And thank you, Amanda. I'm on the Monty Peninsula Shire Council as a Deputy Mayor this year. And I put a nom through last year for the Rights of Nature principles for us to have a look at it. I was able to get a workshop after that, but it's really hard to gain traction. So with these principles, if I could take away what I've learned today, as well as Ickley and the presenters, especially you, Amanda, I might reach out to you to actually help me work through this. I will be advocating to Tanya Plebisek, as well as our state government ministers, to see if we can move somehow on this. I think at the moment it's timely, as a lot of webinars that I attend here actually say that we have to be, we're doing something now. It's going to be a slow process, but I want to get in front of our local council to help move this along. So that's where I was coming from for the principles, which, you know, one of them is the allowance for nature and ecosystems and nature to exist and thrive. And we're having trouble down here on the peninsula with inappropriate development.
Thanks for flagging that, Deborah. I think we'll be able to follow up on that.
Yes, I'll follow up, Amanda. Thank you.
Right. Amy, I noticed there's a couple of questions here specifically about your research. Do you want to respond to those? One from Karen Jones, Parramatta, for instance. Can you see those?
Yeah, I saw Karen's question about the connectivity study that Holly Kirk produced. And yeah, so this work was done in 2020, and we were aware that work related to connectivity was underway. So in terms of the indicators we investigated, we deliberately focused on non-connectivity related indicators because we didn't want to kind of duplicate what was already happening. Was there another question? And I'm happy to have a follow-up conversation with Karen. I think there's a couple of other.
I think most of the rest of the chats are sort of question and answer. I think they sort of take care of themselves. Okay, well, look, we're just about out of time. I'd like to really thank very warmly our speakers. I think we just canvassed all the different sort of angles on the biodiversity challenge that we have. I'd like to thank Sharon, by the way, the lady here who is called Oceania. She's sitting in Durban in South Africa at dawn, having just arrived there and suffering from jet lag, and she's done all the back room. So a big hand for Sharon. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, everyone. Keep an eye on our emails because we do run these webinars fairly frequently. And in July, we'll be running a special workshop for the 9 or 10 councils which have joined the Academy to help to progress that work. So again, thank you, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.